Hello, everyone, and welcome to Session 3 of the Global Black Feminist Reading Circle. My name is Randy Henderson, and I am one of the Black Feminist Reading Circle members of this online group. This session runs from January 20th until June 2nd and includes 2 week-long breaks. Our democratically selected reading material is Harriet A. Washington's book, Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present. Our book group meets each Tuesday evening from 6:30 to 8 on the Google Plus Hangouts on Air platform. You may find the Global Black Feminist Reader Circle on Google Plus, YouTube, and Facebook, and always feel free to join us in reading our story together.
Welcome everyone to meeting number 5 of the Global Black Feminist Reading Circle in our reading of Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet Washington. I'll be your moderator tonight. Georgette Moses is my name, and I'll ask each one of our members tonight to go around and introduce themselves. Let us start with Mr. Joel.
Hey, how you doing? I'm calling in from Charleston, South Carolina. Most people call me JJ. Just glad to be here. God bless. God bless.
Thank you, Joel. And Venita?
Hi, my name is Peter Walker, and I'm joining you from Connecticut. Welcome, and God bless, Joel.
Thank you, Venita. And last but not least, Michelle.
Hello, everybody. I am Michelle Odom. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm happy to be here. This session runs until June 9th, and anyone that still wants to join in, please do so.
Excuse me, chapter 4, the surgical theater. In this chapter, Harriet Washington explores in detail the reason why African Americans justifully saw hospitals and medical schools as places of terror, violence, and shame, and not of medical care. Black bodies was considered clinical material with neither legal rights to control their most intimate bodily functions, avoid degrading public displays, or seek redress for being ill-used or murdered at the hands of medical professionals and their students. These physicians practice invasive and surgical procedures on interned slaves and free African Americans to explore new techniques, display their surgical skills or lack thereof, and boost their reputation among their peers. Washington notes that there were a few voices in protest to these abuses. The black physicians James McCune Smith and W. Montague Carr regularly defended the human rights of African Americans. In 1894, Rudolph Matus, MD, published a 125-page surgical analysis exposing the faulty logic of the scientific racism that allowed the use of treatments devised, adopted, or rejected based on black bodies for their white patients. The availability of black bodies, poor bodies, and other desperate souls as clinical material could make or break these medical establishments, and were essential in meeting their students' enrollment goals. It was all about training, never the healing. Well, I have a mentor that's a physician, and he's a friend. I was talking to him actually just today, and we were talking about, um, you know, the individual that we read about, the butcher last week. What's his name? I forget his name. Forget
Oh.
slipped.
Sims.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, this particular doctor, he's in South Carolina. Uh, this African American doctor, he has a charity down here called Closing the Gap in Healthcare, in which I volunteer for. And the significance of the charity is to close the gap of health disparities of African Americans in this community in South Carolina and the nation. Very successful. This doctor, he's won the American Medical Association Award in 2013. However, he said some years back, he was, they called him and wrote him a letter to give him the award for Sims. And he's like, who is this guy? And so he actually, you know, this Dr. Bell, he actually, you know, he studied this particular book, Medical Apartheid, because he said this is basically the genome of African Americans. It was practiced for over hundreds of years, and this is why a lot of African Americans don't trust hospitals and whatnot today. But they were really astonished when he turned down that award, because he Googled him and he remembered reading about him, and then the lady said, well, why are you turning it down? She said, well, he said, well, Google the doctor and call me back. And then she called back and she understood. But they were highly upset that he turned that award down many years ago. But that's the basis of what he does. And he went on to say, the Medical University of South Carolina, the history of it is down here in Charleston, South Carolina, along with a lot of the other schools that were also medical schools. He said that black folk, they wouldn't walk past that school, that hospital at night, and because they would become experiments. And still today, black folk, you know, because of that history, they don't walk past that university. And it's a renowned medical college and hospital here in South Carolina, and a lot of people won't go nowhere near it because of its history. And that's just not this particular university, but it's many of them across the nation. And as you see, and when I'm talking to Georgette, a lot of these, and Dr. Bell, he reaffirmed that a lot of these schools were actually in impoverished and African American neighborhoods for just that purpose, body snatchers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's so important that we know our history and tell our own stories.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, if we didn't have Harriet Washington, who's an ethicist, putting all of this together, how much would we not know? He might have taken that award, you know. And
Yeah.
and the white folks, was the white folks trying to give him the award?
Oh yeah, it was white folk, and the lady that and it's a huge award down here, but he said he started to go to the it was a big conference in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. They was going to get him up and stand him on, you know, and he was going to give a speech. And you know, he called several of his friends, his mentor at one of his friends at Howard University, who was a physician and, you know, since passed away. And he asked him what he thought. But he said, hey, you know, his first thing was to go and turn down the award in front of all the physicians, but he was advised that wouldn't be a wise thing to do. And you know, and so you know, and he's really a great guy. But you know, the other part of the story with that is that even right now, one of the universities have him on a diversity, you know, as a consultant of the diversity, and he wrote an article here in the Charleston paper that you know, the people that hired him, and when they did a paper on him on the the importance of diversity in hospitals and boardrooms, and when it comes to African Americans, is that he blasted the university that, the hospital that hired him. And because they thought he was going to stand up and be a patsy for him because they had a major problem, but he really blasted them in the paper. But his thing was, in order for things like this, experimentations and everything else that happened to African Americans, they have to include us as doctors so we can tell our own story. But, he said this book, like anybody that comes into his organization, and he was glad I was reading it because I do volunteer for it. He had them to read this book so they can understand. He actually told me, he said, because of what happened to us, he said, how we feel about doctors and other medical institutions is actually in our DNA because it was done for hundreds of years. He said,
I believe it.
He says it actually changed us. And he said that he's trying to close the gap in health disparities in the physical way, but it's actually in our spirit about how we feel about Western medicine and how our parents felt about it. And anyone that reads this particular book will understand why our parents, they won't go to the doctor, or they seek out alternatives, or they go to Yellow Root or something like this here. They have good reason to, and still today.
Yeah, and in any kind of trauma, they started finding maybe about 20 years ago that girls who are sexually abused, it physically changes the way your brain develops.
Yeah.
Any kind of prolonged trauma, including poverty.
Yes.
So, of course, our history with Western medicine it is in our DNA, has actually changed who we are as people. But I'm just thinking the story you're telling, Joe, about the white folks. On the one hand, maybe they didn't know the history of Marion Sims, and they were just, innocently, because he is. He is this celebrated figure in medicine,
Right.
and has been all along. But, I can just picture that some of them.
Oh, they know.
Some of them know the history.
A great deal of them probably know. It's just like, I told the story about John Rhodes and the Rhodes Scholar. If people actually knew the history behind that capitalist that went down to South Africa and flipped it into apartheid, and then went to Rwanda and whatnot, Rhodesia, which it was named after him, and used and mined and made people out of slaves and blood diamonds and the whole 9 yards. And now he comes back as this celebrated person, and as people get the Rhodes Scholar, they would never even even accept anything from this racist guy.
I know, it's like clowning us.
He started apartheid.
Yeah.
But they have a lot of trophies like that for people that were just plain. And we want to, a lot of times we don't want to talk about even, we don't want to talk about what the Nazis did and Hitler. They did that for 4 years. We're talking about these people did this here for 100 years.
Yeah,
hundreds. What I mean? Hundreds of years, hundreds of years. And the only thing they did with the Nazis when they brought them over here is like, well, you know what? Y'all doing some good stuff over there.
Right.
In the 40s, come back and let's do it some more, So,
right.
Anyway. I got a story to tell y'all later on, but go ahead.
All right, well, let Georgette tonight. You got next week.
Yeah, he's warming up, y'all.
Yeah. All right, Joe.
Okay. Thanks for sharing all of that.